Today we're talking about a topic that I've recently somewhat addressed, but the question keeps popping up, so I wanted to give a more direct answer to it. And that's, is the selfish support back? Due to the changes to aura items, a lot of people seem to assume that the selfish support should now be an option again, and well, obviously as I was one of the people creating this build, it comes back to me and I get the question a lot. Now, if you've seen my recent videos, you will see one that's also linked up here, that is about support builds and how these stats change. If you look at those stats, then you will be able to tell that certain numbers indicate certain things there. I won't go into too much detail, just check out that video. But as such, you can already make a lot of interpretations from that. But I want to specifically talk about the selfish support, why it was gone, and what I think about the situation now. The selfish support used to be built a year ago that was made by me for Incon when he was looking for the build with the highest potential tankiness, the highest effective health in both physical and magical regards. And I just looked through the defense items to find those stats. The intention of the build was not to give your team much support in any way, but rather just to be as tanky as possible and survive as much damage and burst as possible. At the time, the build was, in my opinion, a little bit misunderstood because it was never supposed to be a blueprint for something a support should be building every game, but rather showing you the most effective health items and then allowing you to branch out from those items, looking into items that help the situation more, but rather keeping the skeleton of a build surrounding it in order to have a lot of effective health in any way. It also highlighted some items that didn't have as much preference in the mainstream beforehand in regards to their effectiveness. The build was actually used in the SPL by both Incon and in a variation by Refer as well, though some parts of it, namely Mail of Renewal and Stone of Gaia, were more contested and debated. One item that really stood out and gained a lot of popularity through the numbers behind the build was Spirit Robe. That was the one that got nerfed later on, kinda because it was bought a lot at a stage after that. So that is what the build was. Then Season 4 came and things changed. Gauntlet of Thebes received a major buff, making it one of the strongest aura items, or rather the strongest aura item in the game. And Sovereignty was buffed in regards to its aura too. With those buffs, it was not very reasonable to build selfishly at all anymore. There were just too many strong items that helped your team while giving you a lot of effective health, still much better than the counterparts that just helped yourself. Even though the effective health may not have been quite as high, just the stats that it provided for your team were so much more and worth so much more in that comparison that there really was no justification to go into a selfish build. Now, in a recent patch, we saw a nerf to both Gauntlet of Thebes and Sovereignty that don't make them quite as core in your build anymore. As such, people naturally started wondering about the selfish support build and if it would be an option again. And here's what I will say about this. The selfish support had a few core components, of which some are better and some are worse in any scenario. The first one is Hide of the Urchin. Hide of the Urchin is a great item if you're just looking to survive and you're expecting to get some kills. The effective health on the base version is already really nice, though there are better items if you're just looking for physical effective health early in the game. As such, it should probably not be rushed in most circumstances anymore, as you want to have some physical defense in most scenarios first, and you don't want to have to rely on the stacks. I personally think that there is not much of a reason to build this item in most games. You do get the benefit of being more tanky, but you lose out on so many auras, and there are better auras than we used to have. Just think items like Shogun's Kusari, we didn't have that before. Think even Stone of Gaia, which has a new passive now, which works better in that regard. So there are many items that, while not having as much protection, just provide you with more that did not used to do that much for you. Then again, if you feel like you need to soak up a lot of damage, it's still very good. What's worth pointing out here is that I believe at the moment the item is vastly overbought. A lot of people seem to think that it's kind of core in every single build for supports, and often enough you will not even get the stacks because basically building that way will put your team behind and really, well, make you lose the game in the end. So I do not believe that it should be forced as much as it currently is. Other items in the build also don't really have the same value anymore. This especially goes for Spirit Robe, as this item was nerfed. That doesn't mean that Spirit Robe isn't a great item anymore. It is very, very good in specific situations, but it's not a mandatory item in pretty much any game that you play as a support. Mantle of Discord being changed a little bit kind of falls in the same niche as back then. It is really, really expensive though, and that's something worth keeping in mind. On the other hand, we now have another item with a somewhat similar function, which would be Spectral Armor. Not that this is a very popular item, but just throwing it out there are many options that you can look at now that weren't there beforehand. So what it boils down to for me is no, the selfish support is not back. Not in the way it was back then, and I don't think it ever will, simply due to the item changes. Height of the Urchin hasn't changed, so it's still a strong item when it just comes to raw effective health, but a lot of other items have changed, and a lot of items just offer you a lot more for your support plays, and I would prefer them over this item. Especially if you look at the CDR options, there are also better ones now, and you're not so much forced into the mental tree in general anymore to reach that. I know that this is a highly debated topic in the Smite scene. If you want to have another input on this, I would recommend checking out Polar Bear Mike's video on the support items at the moment. It's very long and very in-depth, but I think also very interesting. There are obviously opposing opinions to that regarding Height of the Urchin, or in my case, that would be regarding Sovereignty, but it's definitely worth checking out. Link will be up here as well. And with that, thank you guys for watching. I hope this was insightful and kind of clarified this question for you. If you're not subscribed yet, feel free to click the sub button and maybe the bell. It really helps me out. See you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.